All right, everyone. My name is Autumn Butler, and I am co-executive director of Oakland Forward. We do education justice work in Oakland County and predominantly Black and Brown communities. And we are a partner organization with Michigan Education Justice Coalition. And so today we are going to be talking about, this is the third workshop in our series on school funding. Our goal was to, make sure that everyone in our community, our members, our partner organizations really understand what this fight is all about. And so we decided to embark upon this training series. So this is the third one. Typically, we meet once a month, and I'm very excited that everyone is here. So today we're going to be talking about school facility and transportation funding 101. And we have our beautiful and intelligent and bright Alexandra Stam Alex, who's going to be kind of guiding us through it along with Molly.
All right.
And Molly is all of those things too.
It's all right.
Yeah.
Thanks,
you are
Autumn.
far
You
too
are
sweet.
too.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the third training series that we are putting on. I'm Alex. I am an education policy analyst for the Michigan League for Public Policy. I'm also a former teacher, so I'm so excited to see some students on the call. Thanks for joining us today. A little bit about the Michigan League for Public Policy. We are a nonpartisan research and advocacy organization that promotes economic opportunity for all. We analyze the impact of public policy on the lives of Michiganders who have been systemically left out of prosperity. We work on things like health, education, economic security, and well-being for all Michiganders, but especially those with low incomes and persons living in communities of color. We are also the state's Kids Count organization, and we work as a part of a national effort to measure the well-being of children at the state and local levels. And all of our work is done through a racial equity lens. These are the three pillars of our work: data, community, and advocacy. So all of our work is rooted in advancing racial equity and pursuing justice in one of these three areas.
The Michigan Education Justice Coalition, MEJC, is a statewide network. We're committed to advocating for equitable public education policies and funding to create safe and healthy learning environments. For us, we envision that Michigan is a place where public schools get the support they need, strengthening communities and making them better places to live for all of us. And we're made of a coalition of social and economic justice organizations and education organizations, as you can see.
All right. So one of the things that we inspired this series, and for the adults on the call, I think this will be you'll get a chuckle, is that one of the biggest questions we get anywhere we go when we start to talk about school funding is, what about the lottery money? Where's the lottery money? What happened to it? What's going on? And so we'll talk about that today, but that statement, that question really says to us that there's a lot of assumptions we're all making about school funding, and we need to have the right information so we as community can interact with our state budgets in ways that are powerful, because money is power, and what gets allocated is it gets funded, and we want to be able to have a say in that. So I'm going to play a quick video before Alex gets in. You're hopefully it's 6 minutes long, so strap yourself in. It's a video that our communications director in Detroit made about school funding, and it tells a little bit of a story with it, but hopefully it gets you rooted in what is school funding, how does it work? And I'm gonna see if I can get this to work. So this is the first time we've shown it, so be nice, but also tell us if it doesn't make any sense. Okay. Hold on. Chat. Got a little friend here with me. Okay. All right, so folks can see my screen, thumbs up. All right, so let's see if we can make this work.
For as I can remember, the picture in Detroit has always been.
Wait, hold on, sorry.
Public
1
schools
second.
were open and thriving in 1980. Fewer than 100 are in operation today. The rest have been abandoned, demolished, or converted into charter schools. But how did we get to this point? I don't want you to get a bad impression of me. Just because I'm stuck in detention doesn't mean I don't like school. I was always very curious, and sometimes my curiosity landed me in detention. That's how I heard what no kid in Detroit wants to hear, that our school was going to be closed. I heard the businessman talk on and on about low enrollment and high maintenance costs. High maintenance costs? I've had broken windows in my classroom since I was in the 5th grade. Detention was a horrible place to be, but I usually found a way to distract myself. Instead of sitting there for hours, I used the time to find out more about school funding. I read books, newspapers, and magazines, and got ideas about how to save my school. When Proposal A was passed, the way schools are funded in Michigan changed completely. Before Proposal A, schools were funded primarily through local property taxes, which were close to 69% of the state-local split of school finance, with the state providing the rest. After Proposal A, this average dropped to 20%. Since 1993, the state has been directing funds to schools through the foundation allowance, which provides a specific amount of money per student, with the idea of establishing equity in education across the state. Now, the problem is that the state of Michigan does not provide funds to build, improve, or maintain schools. For those projects, districts must collect funds through local taxes, and so inequalities persist. As an example, because of differing property values, Detroit would have to set its property tax rate higher than Bloomfield Hills in order to collect the same amount. As a result, ruined schools in poor districts can't be properly maintained. Doesn't this seem unfair? And I immediately understood that I had to do something to save my school. When I told my classmates about what I'd learned, they just laughed at me, and the teacher sent me back to detention for disrupting class. I tried to talk to my mom too, but she didn't know anything about how schools were funded. I thought the schools were funded through the lottery, she said. I realized that I needed to find out more about this. My grandpa must know. He knows everything, I thought. He was a teacher, and it's because of him that I want to be one too. Of course, he knew all about the money that goes from the lottery to the schools. In 2019, the Michigan Lottery reported its biggest contributions to schools ever, a record of $1.07 billion. It sounds like a lot of money, right? But the Michigan Lottery is only a slice of the pie, and it's smaller than you probably think. At the next meeting of parents and guardians, I took my grandpa so he could tell everyone about school funding. At the end of the meeting, I said we could go to Lansing to advocate for change in the state budget. But unfortunately, it was too late. How many schools have to be demolished before people understand that this is a reality that only those of us who live in the poorest districts have to face? What else can we do? My grandpa used to say that there are two types of fighters. There are those who fight to survive, and those who help others to fight. We can fight. Fight to change this funding system that is so unfair. Fight for a new and more equitable system that meets the needs of the state's most vulnerable students. That fight gave me a new opportunity in front of the school board. The school is the heart of every neighborhood, and when our local power is stripped away, everything around dies. I want to keep playing with my friends on the block. I want to keep seeing my teachers smiling outside of the classroom every morning. And the only thing that will save our schools is more money.
All right. Thanks for watching the first video. Hopefully you learned a lot. That's going to be released soon, but I'm going to turn it back to Alex to jump us into the PowerPoint. I'm going to stop this and get it right. Hold on.
Hi, buddy.
My son was asking for more like it was a cartoon. Do you want more?
It's the only
Yes.
video today. That's not fair. They have
I
to listen
know.
to
So
me
sorry,
now.
buddy. All right, let me make sure I get the PowerPoint up so we got it right. Okay. And whatever questions you have in the chat or in the room at 482 Forward, if you have questions about school facilities, drop them in the chat. And hopefully if we don't answer them in the presentation, we'll be able to make sure we come back to them. So, all right, Alex, take it away.
All right, I threw a couple breakouts in today too, Molly. All right, guys. Goals of today. Whoever has the PowerPoint, if you want to flip it over to the next. Thanks. All right, so by the end of training today, so in an hour, hopefully everyone here has a good understanding of the basics of how schools are funded in Michigan, especially as it relates to school facilities and transportation. And then aside from just kind of knowing how this stuff works and what the problems are, we also want to make sure that everyone leaves here today with some tools to engage and advocate in the budget process, so you guys can advocate for some things. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to get into some breakout teams, breakout groups, and I just want you guys to kind of talk about what questions you have about school facility and or transportation funding. And when you guys get in your groups, if one person in that group can kind of be like the front man and take some notes and then drop a couple questions in the chat. I have kind of a funky computer setup today. I have like my laptop here and Zoom up here. And it just makes it really hard for me to see if people have questions. So what we'll do instead of asking questions and getting responses throughout the presentation, if you guys want to just throw stuff in the chat after we meet or after you meet in your groups, someone from MEJC will kind of go through and start answering those kind of as I'm talking so that we can kind of do both at the same time today. All right, the next slide has the breakout directions on it, and then whoever is the host gets to do the breakouts because I will definitely mess it up.
Drew, can you do the breakouts or you can make me host and I can do them?
Are we?
Yes. How many do you need? Let me.
You
I'm
can
gonna
do, why don't
actually-
you do 4, but maybe just
use in the
put me with
2025
MEJC, with the
school year,
482 folks.
And implement it in the same, wait a minute.
Cool. Let me
Something I had a
see.
question about that, and I can't figure out what it was.
I'll just assign manually. I'll just throw.
Oh, sorry, I stopped share, sorry.
Give me 1 sec here. How many? We got 16 people on, so I can do.
Dropped in the chat.
But under.
Like, 4 per group is fine.
Yeah.
Can you put us together, like, can we just be our own group or just since there's so many of us? Okay.
Yeah, just put
Sounds great.
But it talks about special ed research,
Okay.
and other research doesn't specify hours.
It's in here too, cause I was looking at that.
Did you all see that?
It's in there. Let me go. Yeah, yeah, it's in there, it says it's MEJC research, and it's $4
All right.
million.
There you go.
Oh, just that sole reference, that's what I'm saying, if they didn't exclude.
Drew, do you know how to send a message to the breakout rooms? All right, looks like some great questions are coming in. If I'm just gonna give you a thumbs up, it's because I'll talk about it in a minute. I think I saw Perry on the call and I saw a question that she would love to answer, I'm sure. One of Molly's questions.
Yeah, drop your questions in the chat, folks. I know we had a great breakout.
Good. All right, hopefully I will get to some of these questions as I talk. Okay, I'm not gonna type that. I'm just gonna talk. Here we go. All right, whenever we can get the PowerPoint back up. I actually just learned recently that there is no like legal obligation for school districts to provide busing. All right, let's go over to the next slide and get into it, guys. All right, so in order for us to have a good grasp on how school funding works in Michigan, there are a few terms that are very important to know. The first is homestead property. Just as it sounds, homestead properties are primary residences, so the house in which you live. So when we're talking about taxing a homestead property, we're talking about the property taxes that you pay on your house, on your property. All other property, including commercial, industrial, agricultural property, rental residential property, and vacation homes, is all considered non-homestead, and they're taxed differently. Go ahead and go to the next one. Okay, so we know now that we have some homestead property, we have non-homestead property, and now we need to understand what it means to actually like collect taxes on these properties. So when we talk about tax revenue, we mean a tax rate, or sometimes called a millage rate, multiplied by the tax base, which is the taxable property value. So a mill might be kind of a familiar sounding term because we had voting day not too long ago. We have voting day coming up, and there were some districts who were voting on millages, and there are a bunch of districts who will be voting on millages on May 7th. A mill is 1/10 of a cent, but it helps me to think about a mill as paying $1 in taxes for every $1,000 of taxable value. So when I think about my house, I think about, okay, how much did I pay for my house? And what is $1 for every $1,000 of that? And that kind of helps me understand what a mill is, because it's a small amount. And I was an English teacher, so this math stuff is hard. So when you guys go to the polls to vote on renewing or approving a millage, you might read or hear something about collecting so much money per student or per pupil. So the way that we can think about this is that the revenue that's being collected, or the money being collected, is equal to the millage rate times the taxable value, or the revenue over pupil. This is all up on the screen. So there's just some kind of like easy algebra formulas up there. I promise they're not too complicated. So let's just put this together in examples so we can kind of see how this works. All right, so we have our formulas up top. So revenue, or that money that we want to collect and bring in, equals the millage rate times the taxable value. Or if we want to think of it in per pupil terms, we can do that too, and we can just put a pupil underneath it. So revenue per pupil is equal to the millage rate times taxable value per pupil. All right, so let's say that Star School District wants to generate $8,000 per pupil. They know that that's how much money they need. So the district has $140,000 in taxable value per pupil. What property tax rate, or how many mills, does the district need to generate in order to get to that $8,000 per pupil? All right, think about it for a second, and then let's go ahead and plug it in. You can go over to the next slide. So we have the same thing that was just on the last slide up at the top, and then at the bottom, we just kind of plugged in those numbers. So $8,000 equals the millage rate times $140,000. Or our millage rate is equal to $8,000 divided by $140,000, which means that we would need to collect 57.1 mills in order to get as much money as we need for our district. I promise this is the only math problem for the rest of the evening. I know that this isn't like a super easy thing, especially because we've got fractions over fractions. But these slides will be available after the training. Don't feel like you need to like write all this down super fast or memorize it. But it is important to know that a mill is what is it, $100? What am I saying? A tenth of a cent or $1 for every $1,000 of taxable value. So $1 for every $1,000 of taxable value. And so we're going to be talking about that as we talk about how to collect some money. All right, that's it for the math. We're going to move on to a little bit of history. I wasn't going to talk about this today, but since it was referenced in the video and we have some students here, I just want to give you a brief little history lesson about how we used to collect money or revenue for schools in Michigan. So before 1994, which I'm sure is before most of you were born, schools were funded by local tax revenue. So local school district voters would set their own property tax rates, and that's how they would fund their local school districts. Voters could agree to spend as much or as little as they wanted to on their schools. So if a school said, hey, we think that we need a millage rate of this much to collect this much money to run our school, voters had the power to say, no, or yeah, sure, of course, here you go. Now, that might sound kind of nice because we have some local control going on here, but this kind of a system resulted in some really big problems. First of all, property taxes in Michigan were among the highest in the nation. And second of all, unsurprisingly, this resulted in school districts with hugely different funding levels. So in 1994, we scrapped it, came up with a new funding system that we call Proposal A, and voters in Michigan approved this. So Proposal A centralized education funding at the state level and established a minimum revenue level for Michigan school districts. So now the state has control over all the public school districts, and the state guarantees a certain funding level. So we know that at least everyone is getting so much money. So Proposal A reduced property taxes by a lot, increased the sales tax from 4 to 6%. That extra little 2% goes right to schools, and required all local districts to levy 18 mills on non-homestead properties. So 18 mills on non-homestead properties. Every single district in the state of Michigan has to levy, or they have to get that amount of money, raise that amount of money. So that's why we did the math lesson. All right. This slide is for visual purposes only. These percentages are not exact. I just kind of want to show you that there are 3 different funding streams that make up school funding in Michigan. Some comes from the federal government, and that's that dark blue at the bottom. Some from local sources, and we're going to talk about that mostly today. And that's the orange at the top, and then that big chunk in the middle is state funding. So that's that contribution that we just talked about, that 18 mills. So most of the funding for your schools is from state funds. Again, this is like approximate, it's not exact. All right, now let's look at what the heck is, what goes into the state budget. So here is a breakdown of all the taxes, all the revenue that goes into the education budget. So that big chunk over in like the medium color blue is the sales tax. So that's that 2% hike that we talked about from Proposal A. So that goes straight into the education budget. A portion of everybody's income goes into the education budget. The state education tax is the bright green 15%. This comes from collecting 6 mills on every homestead property. So everybody who owns a home and lives in that home as a primary residence pays 6 mills on that property, and that goes to the education budget. Some lottery money, as you guys can see, goes to education. It's not, it's not buying everything, that's for sure. And importantly, this chart does not include that 18 mills required by local districts to raise on non-homestead properties, just because this is like this is state taxes, not local. So, all right. The foundation allowance. So the main source of operating funds for a school district comes from the foundation allowance. Over half of the school aid fund is used for the foundation allowance costs. Every year, the legislature determines a dollar amount that schools will receive for each kid enrolled in their district, or pupil. So we call that per pupil funding. The foundation consists of a combination of local and state contributions. So local districts contribute by collecting that tax of 18 mills on non-homestead properties, and then the state makes up the rest. So let's say that the legislature says, hey, This year, the foundation allowance is going to be $8,000 per pupil. District A says, cool. They raise their $5,500 by collecting 18 mills on all non-homestead properties. Well, that leaves a little bit of a hole to get up to that $8,000. So then the state kicks in an additional $2,500 per student. And so this is different from district to district, depending on how much money you get when you collect 18 mills on your non-homestead properties. There are, of course, some nuances to the foundation allowance that came out of Prop A, but we don't need to get like too into the weeds with all of that. So take a look at another pie chart. All right. So this is a chart of all the things that the education budget pays for. So you can see that huge piece over that looks like it's at half. That's that per pupil funding. So if you have, you know, so many kids in your district and each kid is about $10,000, then the school gets $10,000 per kid. In addition to that, the education budget allocates money for other school-based services and costs. So some things that you can see over here are money allocated for school safety and for mental health services, which we will be talking about next month. You can also see there's a little sliver up there in kind of a lighter orange for transportation costs. So funding for transportation at the state level is kind of a little skinny piece of that pie. Let's see what else. Teacher salaries, classroom materials, any expense that is not what we're actually here for today. School facilities. There's not a single piece of the pie here that goes towards school facility funding. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about these two things we're here for today. All right, so the first thing, that little tiny pie piece that you guys saw was for school transportation. Obviously, we know that it is hugely important for kids to go to school. It's hugely important for a lot of parents to have a way to get their kids to school. But school districts are actually not legally required to provide busing for students. Someone asked a really important question in the chat. I'm not sure if it's been answered yet or not, about the difference between funding for special education services and general education students. Yes, students with special education services, if it's in their IEP, if it's in their like legal document that they have to have transportation, they need transportation to get from like one building to a next, that is legally protected. However, for most students, or for general education students, it's not. So the state currently provides $125 million for school transportation. This came out of a study by the School Finance Research Collaborative in May of 2022 that recommended spending money, a certain amount of money for school transportation and using a certain formula for school transportation. So that's where this amount of money came from. However, we also know from that study and others that fully funding transportation in the state would cost about $400 to $450 million. So there's a gap there between what we're spending or what we're providing for schools and what schools are actually spending on transportation. When we don't fully fund something, like we talked about with special education last training, now schools have to come up with that money from other parts of their budget. So where are they taking it from? They have to make that decision. I have to pay for my school bus drivers. I have to pay for my buses. I have to get my kids to school. The state's not paying for all of it. So I have to take that money from somewhere else. And this is really, really a huge stressor for a lot of districts, especially those who have students who are spread out, who have a very big ways to go from picking up one kid to another. In fact, I was part of a study at Michigan State that interviewed a bunch of superintendents of rural districts, and we talked to them about their biggest stressors, and transportation was one of them. And we even talked to some districts who school buses get on a ferry and they drive over to an island, or they're ferried over to an island to pick up some students, and then they come back to take them to the school. So we have buses that are traveling in very different terrain than maybe we think of. I'm in Lansing, so in this part of the state, or in Detroit. So we have some unique needs in the state of Michigan, and the cost of busing is something that we kind of treat as like an equal thing, like here, everyone take their same size slice of the pie, when that's just really not the case. We have schools in Michigan who need, their buses are traveling through a lot more snow, dirt roads, and just bigger distances. And so it's just not an equitable thing that's happening in Michigan right now.
I think the other thing to mention for transportation, y'all, is for places who have like school choice or multiple types of districts across their city. So like Detroit, I think Pontiac, Saginaw, like lots of complicated districts now, or school choices, is that, mostly before, people used to go to schools in their neighborhood. That was, so like transportation was much easier when you were required to like go to schools in your community. Whereas like, if people are trying to go really far away, it also adds another complex to transportation.
Yeah, Lansing has magnet schools, and so students are kind of bused all throughout the city, which is great because then you're at a school that maybe is providing some sort of special education that you are interested in, and you're with kids from other parts of the city. However, you do have to travel a lot further, a lot of times to do this. And so if there's not transportation, it makes it really difficult. Someone else also asked in the chat after your breakout room about if schools can use public transportation to bus students. And in fact, Lansing Public Schools did that this year for the first time. Middle school and high school students are taking public transportation to school. So they get like a bus ticket.
Alex, is there different, there's some stuff in the chat. Are there different rules for special education students or homeless students or foster care students?
Special education students, yes, they are legally protected. Perry probably has a better answer for that. I don't think it's for like picking up from home and going to school. I think it's from going from like a specialty center to a different building, school building. Do you want to chime in, Perry?
For special, you are asking me about special education?
Yeah.
It just has to be determined by their IEP team that it's needed. So there may be a variety of reasons, like that the student maybe can't ride their bus for other students because it may be sensory issues or things like that, but it just has to be written into the IEP plan. And then for foster youth, well, and homeless youth, especially homeless youth, have the right to stay in their school of origin. So if they end up moving around, the school district has to, by federal law, provide transportation for them to stay in their same school. And that also, there's also similar laws around that for foster youth, and lack of transportation cannot be a barrier for them to be able to go to school. So that can sometimes, that's really important, but sometimes can be really expensive for districts.
Great.
Thank you so much. All right, so on to the next, I don't want to say problem, but topic. All right, funding for school facilities. I think that this may shock some of you. It shocks a lot of people that I tell that Michigan is one of 14 states that does not provide state aid for school facilities. Funds needed for capital infrastructure must come from voter approved bonds and millages. So these funds can be used on either building a school building, like from the ground up, or upgrading your school facilities. So think about all of the things that have changed since the time that your parents were in school, maybe even at your school building, to now. I mean, when my parents were in school, we didn't have computers in schools. We had libraries that were full of books and those card catalog things. Now we have libraries that are full of media centers, right? Hopefully, with computers everywhere and big projectors, and they're like data hubs instead of having things like when I was little of all those little drawers with the, I don't even remember what those things are called, but anyway. So any sort of upgrade like that to a facility, like changing a library to a media center, upgrading science labs, upgrading technology, putting some high-speed internet in a school building, upgrading athletic facilities, all of those things have to come from a bond or a millage that voters locally approve. The state does cap how much money districts are able to raise this way. And although the state doesn't really provide any money for paying for facility costs, they do provide some support to districts in terms of like taking on debt. Someone also asked about charter schools in the chat. Charter schools don't have a tax base. They don't have a district. And so they are not able to levy dollars for capital infrastructure. So they have to rely on their foundation allowance revenue to pay for facility costs. So that per pupil funding I talked about earlier, that money for them has to go towards paying for their facilities, which is really difficult to do because you have to pay for everything else too. All right. So in 2024, we have, I think I counted today by hand, 48 school districts that are voting on bonds to build or improve their school facilities. These communities are all over the state. They range from urban to suburban to rural. They range from big to small. And I just pulled a few examples from websites about that kind of show the array of districts that are asking their voters to approve a bond to either build a facility somewhere or upgrade a facility. A lot of these districts are relying on, hey, look how old our building is, our building's falling apart, or they're talking about school safety. Hey, this building is just not safe in today's day and age. We need to build a new entrance, new office entrance. And so we need the voters to approve these things so that we are able to continue to keep our kids in a safe and healthy environment. You might also see on most of these that it says like a 0 increase. That's because they had already approved a bond like this. And so this is just to kind of like renew it. And so in a lot of these places, their tax rate would actually just stay the same. It wouldn't go up. If they voted no, then their taxes would go down. All right. So is this equitable? Is this an equitable thing, or is this an equitable way to fund school facilities? So since Michigan relies on local property taxes to fund school facilities, the requirement on taxpayers is different depending on where you live. So we can imagine 2 school districts, and let's say each of them needs a new elementary building. So let's think about a district that's thriving, it's populous, it's urban, there's lots of businesses in this area, there's a lot of people drawn to this area, really nice new houses, okay? That's District A. District B is small, there's not a lot of local businesses, it's rural, there's not a lot of population density, people are kind of spread out. And I mean, I've lived in a town like that and absolutely loved it, but it's quite different than District A. Now, because District A just has more taxable property value than District B, the residents would pay lower taxes as a share of their income than those in District B would to build the exact same elementary school. So to me, that's what's kind of so shocking about this, is that to build the same school in 2 different places, it is potentially a very different ask for the residents of that district. So in 2019, a study out of Michigan State illustrated the millage cost to build a new elementary school in 4 of Michigan's districts. So this is not even hypothetical, this is real. The tax burden from this study showed that building the same elementary school would range from requiring 1.47 mils in the most property wealthy district to requiring 22.3 mils in the district with the lowest taxable value to build the exact same school building. So you can see how the tax requirement for these Michigan residents is super unequal, which leads to inequitable educational experiences for Michigan students. So with over $1 million in taxable value per pupil, Ludington could purchase a new school by levying just 1.47 mils, but which would be a tax payment of like $147 for an owner of a $200,000 house. To build that property in Carrollton would cost 22.27 mils, or $2,226 for the owner of a $200,000 house. So we went from $147 annual payment to over $2,000 to go towards the exact same elementary building. And what's even more, I don't want to say funny, upsetting, is that the state has a cap, like I said, on how much districts can levy from these millages, and it's set at 13 mils. So that building is not even legally possible to build in Carrollton. So even though passing Proposal A in 1994 was a really important step in creating a more equitable education funding system here in Michigan, and then we've taken steps after that to increase our equity, especially in the last budget. There are areas of education funding in Michigan that need some major attention, and school facility funding is definitely one of them, which hopefully you guys can see from this example and what you saw in the video before.
Alex, can you explain why that one is illegal again? 22.247?
The state says that the highest number of mills that you can levy from a school facility bond is 13 mills. So 13 mills is the cap. That's the most that districts are allowed to raise in a bond. So building that building is just not even possible. All right. So just threw a lot of information at you guys, a lot of numbers. And we're going to get back into some breakout groups and just kind of debrief. What's confusing? What's surprising? Maybe you guys can kind of help answer each other's questions, because I can tell you from firsthand experience, it is much easier to learn something if you're able to kind of explain it and teach it to someone else. So we're going to get back into breakout groups and do kind of the same thing we did before. You guys talk, we'll give you like 4-ish minutes, and then throw some questions in the chat.
When do you want them all back, Alex?
7?
Sounds good to me.
All right.
Perfect.
Bring them back whenever.
Looking at it,
Close the rooms.
and this is just an open.
Oh, why did it not work? Okay.
And you
I don't know.
said,
I
what about the
appreciate you for
budget?
doing this because I would be
There's another
stressful.
section.
No, you're good. I am sorry. I did not. I was supposed to
No,
click
you
2
are
buttons.
fine. I do not want the responsibility of running the Zoom.
Managing.
No, I got you. All right. Is there any way for me to like bring them back immediately? All right. I guess there's 40 seconds.
It's fine. It'll, yeah, yes.
Okay, thank you. Mhm. I'll check, I'm looking to see if I can find it.
If they're not leaving the timers on, they must be at least like having good conversations, you know?
Isn't that the best thing about it? Yes, absolutely.
That and talking to your screen and pretending like you can see people's faces. That's
Yeah, absolutely.
I miss being in person for things.
No, I know. I like people to be, I guess I'm being hypocritical right now, but I do like to see people's faces when I'm doing a training for sure.
I can't, it doesn't matter. I can't see it.
Hi,
if you're not looking.
folks.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Feel free to put some questions in the chat. Molly, that's a really good question. I actually didn't know this until recently. I had to look this up. The local community said it. Local cities, towns, villages. They said
Okay.
their own. That was an Alex Google the other day. I didn't know. Like who does?
What other questions, folks? Put them in the chat.
Oh, here, I'll say it like Tanner would. Local municipalities. That's what he would say. I'm like, local places. 30 questions in the chat, guys. And we're going to get the PowerPoint back up. And I'm going to show you Michigan's budget cycle, which is a super exciting thing because we're in the midst of it. I mean, we're always in the midst of it, but we're in the midst of an exciting part of it. And it's actually over my shoulder as well. On my
Put the
bulletin board.
slides on. I'm getting them back up.
It's fine. Look, we can just look right here. I'm
Just
hitting it
everyone
hard.
squeeze your eyes really close to Alex. See, here we go. Okay. And Alex, yes, I'll help answer the Detroit ones.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, let's go back
I
one.
went forward. There you go.
There we go. Okay, everybody. So I know that we've talked a lot about like how things are, but how can we change it? The biggest thing that we can do, maybe, a big thing that we can do is to advocate for the things that we think we need to change during Michigan's budget cycle. So what the heck is that? If you look up at the top, the budget cycle starts every year in February when the governor releases her proposed budget, which she did this year on February 7th. If you are wondering what is in the budget, I have my organization, MLPP, has a breakdown of the governor's budget, and I wrote a breakdown of her education budget, and it's on our website. So please feel free, if you are wondering what the heck's in the budget, to take a look at that. After the governor releases her budget, a bunch of subcommittees in the House and in the Senate meet, and they craft their own versions of the annual state spending plan. In fact, the State Education Committee came out with their recommendations yesterday. They made some tweaks to the governor's budget, some that were really good. I didn't see any that I was like, oh no, that's terrible. So some things that are really great. We're waiting on the House version, and then in April and May, the subcommittee budgets are going to move through the House. They're going to move through the Senate. There's going to be some changes, some amendments. We're going to have some people on the floor debating some things, and that's when we'll get the opportunity for the House and the Senate to take their budgets and bring them together. So sometime late May, early June, we will have the House and Senate kind of iron out the differences between their budgets, and committee changes will all be sent to the legislators for their final approval. And can someone remind me when the final budget has to be?
End of June.
Thank you. So then the legislature has to present that final budget bill to the governor by July 1st. So she can say absolutely not to certain line items, but she does have to sign that budget by October 1st, which is interesting because we all know school starts at the end of August. So we would like for that budget to be done a little bit earlier. Last year it was done earlier, and hopefully it is again this year. And then in October, it all starts over again. So then the governor and the state departments have to start preparing for the next year's budget. And we get this kind of cool conference called CREC, where they tell us how the economy is doing and how much money is going to be coming in and where the money could be going and all of that sorts of stuff. So this is the budget cycle. There are opportunities for you and for me and for all these organizations to step in and tell the subcommittees exactly what we support or don't support from the governor's budget. And that's what part of my job is. So from February to April, so in the last few weeks, organizations and people like me have been doing just that. We've been going to committee hearings and saying, hey, we think this is really great. We need more money here. We really support this. Thank you for all your work last year. And so that is where advocating in the budget cycle is very, very important. And like I said, the House has not, that I know of, released their education budget, unless they did it today and I didn't catch it. All right. Any questions on Michigan's budget cycle? There's so much information on mlpp.org, and I'll put a couple slides up after Molly talks about the MEJC budget tasks. I'm assuming you're talking about these anyway.
I'm gonna have, I think the transportation one, I'm gonna have Perry go over. So we are asking in this year's budget, and we sent this over to the Senate and House, for $100 million for school facility categorical grants, meaning grants that school districts can apply to if they are in need of support for school facilities, specifically school districts that are in the category that it's really hard to raise those local dollars for a grant. And then the other thing we put in the budget is $250,000 for students, families, and educators to participate in a statewide survey about school facilities. So we're working to see if those can get in the budget this year. And I'm gonna turn it over to Perry to talk about, actually, if you're still on, Perry, to talk about, where's Perry off? Perry's off. Autumn, do you want to talk about the school transportation? Look, I put you on the spot.
No, I don't.
I can talk about it.
Thank you.
So it's $10 million in the state budget we're asking this year. One, we want them to continue increasing money for school transportation to try to get to that full number. And we're asking for $10 million extra specifically for homeless and foster care students, because that's an area of students who moved around a lot. We wanted that increased locally in the budget.
I'm sorry, I messed up and didn't put that on the slide.
No, it's okay. I could have got that too.
I'm sorry. Okay, so the Michigan Education Justice Coalition sent all of that over to the House and the Senate, and then we are also having, is it April 30th, our advocacy day, where we'll be at the Capitol advocating for these things. If you guys need any other information, like budget analysis, looking at budget recommendations, like things that we as an organization at MLPP are advocating for, whether it's in education or any other area, our website has tons of fact sheets, infographics, and reports on all of these issues. You can also sign up for email updates from our organization, which are really great. They're called Under the Dome. And so you get information, I want to say it's monthly, on what's happening like under the dome, the Capitol Dome. Don't know why I felt like that was helpful for me to do, but it was. So yeah, if you guys need any information, feel free to look over at our website, send me an email, drop anything in the chat, sign up for lobby day. I will be there. Molly will be there.
I'm going to drop right now. I'm going to share right now. And actually, Autumn, if you can actually just quickly walk people through this, just read folks out our full asks. We have a letter we're writing to legislators to continue to advocate for the things we care about beyond facilities. And so, Autumn, I'm wondering if you're able to just read through. So for people, it's a little small, and I'll drop it in the chat.
Yes, I have my glasses on, so I think I can do it. So these are the asks that we are sending to the legislators. And right now we're asking people to participate in our petition and send an email to Governor Whitmer, Senator Brinks, Representative Tate, Senator Anthony, Representative Whitworth, Senator Camilleri, and Representative Weiss. So those are our legislative targets. So we're trying to look to increase in equity. We're asking for a 20% increase in 31A, which is at-risk money to support students who are homeless, foster care, and students in poverty. We're trying to fix the special education funding, and that'd be $20 million for high-cost programming. Can't see. There you go. Eliminate millage caps and establish an equitable funding formula. We're trying to keep the funds focused on improving student mental health. We know that it's really important that we legislate funding from 31A that's not just going to school resource officers or security, but is really focused on student mental health. Transportation. So we're asking for 10%, and that's what we're talking about today. We know there's a big funding gap, so we're asking for a 10% increase with an additional 10 million to cover school transportation for students that are in foster care, experiencing foster care or homelessness. Facilities, that's what we're talking about. Awarding, and we already talked about it, awarding $100 million in grants to districts, and then allocating $250,000 for students and families. Investing $15 million in the 17 majority Black Michigan cities, or cities that have majority Black districts, to develop culturally responsive interventions that would address the racial disparities among Black and African American students. $2 million to address the school to prison pipeline and create, real long-term solutions and interventions in those same cities. Forgive outstanding debt for Flint Community Schools. We were really good at forgiving a lot of debt for other school districts in the last budget cycle, and so trying to do that for Flint Community Schools as well. Double the funding for ELL students, English as a, what is the ELL students?
English language learners.
Yes, and restructure as a weight of the foundation allowance. And then ensure a living wage for all teachers. And so trying to have the state develop an incentive pilot program to help recruit and retain teachers. And then improving literacy rates across the state by supporting teachers and continuing to provide letters training. So that's all the things we're going to be advocating for when we go up to Lansing on April 30th.
So we would really love for folks to fill out, and Autumn, that was a great overview. Fill out the letter we're sending to legislators. You click that link, we'll send it to all the important legislators around the budget. But I think just a few questions in the chat around Detroit. So I know we have our Detroit students here. So for folks, there is a specific, I know everyone's Detroit's different always, but many districts across the state, they have taxing ability. They're still able to tax, even if the taxes are so, like the mills are just a rate that's beyond the 13. They're still able to get to some mills if they want to run a bond. Obviously they can't in some places because it doesn't make sense. But Detroit, we actually, because of a complicated financial matter, when we were going into bankruptcy, we split our district into two things. One is the Detroit Public Schools Community District, and then one is called Detroit Public Schools. Detroit Public Schools is just an empty vest. It's just a name that holds the debt for our schools. The other one holds all of our buildings, our students, all of that. And the issue is the new district has no ability to tax taxpayers. It's not because the old district actually has the ability to tax taxpayers because of they're helping pay down our debt in that old district. So the new district has no taxing ability. We cannot put a bond on the ballot, even if it's going to be really, really high, which is at the 13%. We're not even allowed to put it on the ballot for the new district because that 13 mils goes to paying down the debt for the old district. So it's complicated, but it really is an unfair structure because we have no way at all just like, I mean, similar to the other districts across the state, we have no way to pay for our buildings, but we have this extra complicated structure of old DPS and new DPS. And new DPS has actually no ability even to put a bond on the ballot because all of those 13 mills we currently have go to the old district to pay down the debt. But that doesn't go to the buildings, that just goes down to old debt that we're paying off.
Like paying off a credit card. It's no fun.
It's like paying off a credit card.
And then you have a new one you
So-
can't use.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, so we don't have any ability right now to raise those 13 mills that other districts do for their buildings. Does that make sense to folks? Other questions? I know there's a lot of Detroiters on here, but we have zero ability to put a bond even on the ballot because we have the debt, and the old district has that ability.
How
But that
long-
old district doesn't have the buildings.
Do we know how long that, until that debt is paid off?
I do know, but not off the top of my head, I do know there is a time period. The
Wait, do
district
you have a
gives,
question?
Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, you asked if we had a question. So like, people are kind of like, okay, then what do we need to do for Detroit schools? Like, if some of the things we're talking about today won't even work for Detroit schools, like, what are the other options?
yeah, that's a great question. We should talk to some of our experts like David Arson. The bill that I know that you guys are all trying to build, a guaranteed tax base, and having districts who can't tax have access to it is one way. So that's the state creating a pot of money out of that any district, regardless of their ability to tax, would have access to. And then Lindsay, we should get a little clearer about how long the debt gets paid down and what happens once we pay down the debt for DPS, what happens to the new district and if they're able to tax the tax base then. But that the bill that the 482 youth in that room, you guys are helping write about creating a tax base that the state has to create that any district can access, guaranteed by the state, and that they will pay it if that the district can't raise that money, is something that seems like the path forward. Other questions?
If you feel like today was valuable, you learned something, we have another one coming up. Same time, same place, Wednesday, May 22nd. We're going to be talking about the funding for at-risk students, mental health funding, and school safety funding. And the state has been providing millions and millions of dollars for this the last few years. So I am looking forward to talking about this. It'll be a whole new training. That's all I have today. Shoot
Autumn,
me an
any
email
last
if anyone needs
words?
anything.
Any other questions, concerns? All right, y'all. We'll see you in a few weeks for the other training. If you have extra questions, we'll save this chat. Lindsay, and any more questions, we'll save the questions in the chat, and anything not answered, we'll make sure we can circle back, okay?
Bye, y'all.
Thanks,
Hi,
y'all.
thank you.
Thanks, everyone.